All right, guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about deep packet inspection on FortiGate firewalls. Real quick, I'm just going to start with some general concepts and talk about why this matters, especially with so much encrypted traffic today, and then jump into a live demo to see how it actually works with a full config guide. So if you want to skip to that part, I'll put a timestamp below if you want to just skip the presentation and get to the configuration and the demo. But real quick, I'll just get into some slides talking about this and some things we want to know before. So let's just start talking about types of traffic. So let's just start with unencrypted traffic. So when we're sending unencrypted traffic, think of this as like sending a postcard. When our data is sent over the network, it gets broken into packets, and each packet has a header, which tells it where to go, and then it has a payload, which is the actual contents. So with unencrypted traffic, that payload is completely visible, just like a postcard. So anyone along the path can read the contents, they can inspect the data, and they can even potentially modify that data. So from a security perspective, this makes things easy to inspect, but obviously this is not secure and doesn't ensure any privacy for the user. Now let's compare that to encrypted traffic. So this is more like sending a sealed envelope. So the packet still has a header, so it can actually be routed across our network, but the payload itself is encrypted. So this means that the contents are hidden. Only the sender and the receiver can read the contents, and the encryption provides integrity, so we can detect tampering if any of that takes place. So this is great for privacy, but this introduces a challenge as network and security administrators. So because that traffic is encrypted, our firewall can't actually inspect the contents. So even though deep packet inspection is capable of inspecting this, we need to decrypt this traffic first. So this is where SSL inspection comes into play, which we'll get into now. So starting at a high level, what is deep packet inspection? So traditionally, firewalls only looked at packet headers. So things like source IP address, destination IP address, port number. That's what we would just call or refer to as basic or stateful inspection. So deep packet inspection goes much further. So instead of just looking at the outside of the packet, DPI actually looks inside the payload. So now we're operating at layer 7. So this allows the firewall to see things like the application that's being used, the kind of traffic that is actually flowing, whether there's any threats inside this traffic, etc. So what this actually enables us to do on the FortiGate is take full advantage of things like the intrusion prevention signatures, antivirus scanning, web filtering, application control, data loss prevention, and more. So we'll get into some of that later. But really the important piece here is encryption. So a huge percentage of traffic is encrypted today, right? So SSL or TLS. So if we want deep packet inspection to be effective, we also need the ability to decrypt that traffic, inspect it, and then re-encrypt it. So that's what we're going to go through here. So we talked about how a huge percentage of traffic today is actually encrypted. So that's the challenge today as network and security administrators. So talking about unencrypted traffic, like the postcard, that is easy to inspect. But most of the traffic today is not like that. It's encrypted. So we can see the trend here that over time, encrypted traffic has gone from being a minority of total traffic on the internet to almost everything, right? So we're in 2026 now. So by this time, we're really looking at nearly 100% of all traffic is encrypted. So we have to remember that encrypted traffic is like that sealed envelope. So deep packet inspection, it gives us the ability to inspect traffic deeply, but it can't actually see inside that encrypted traffic. So this creates a problem because the attackers know this too. So they can hide malware or command and control traffic or exfiltrate data inside encrypted sessions. So without decryption, the firewall has no visibility into what's actually happening. So we have a gap here, right? So we want to be able to deeply inspect our traffic, but the traffic is encrypted. So to get around this, we will do SSL deep inspection. So let's talk about some of the more modern challenges that also impact visibility, right? So we talked about how most of the traffic is encrypted, right? So we're talking about TLS traffic, but now we're also seeing encrypted traffic with things like DNS and the QUIC protocol. So DNS over HTTPS is commonly referred to as DOH. You're essentially encrypting your DNS queries inside HTTPS traffic. So that means traditional DNS monitoring tools no longer have the visibility to see what domains that users on the network are resolving. Then we have QUIC, which is used for HTTP3 traffic. So QUIC runs over port 443, UDP 443, and it encrypts both the transport and the application layer. So because of that, it changes how the inspection works compared to traditional TLS. So in newer FortiOS versions, FortiGate actually does support quick inspection. It's a little less limited and less mature than standard deep inspection, but there is a use for it, and we'll go over that too. So in real world environments, there's really two approaches to kind of get around this. One is to allow and attempt to inspect quick using DPI, and then another method we can do is just to block quick entirely, because when quick is blocked, applications will automatically fall back to HTTPS, right? So that's an option too. So we'll talk about both of these in the config guide. So once that happens, the firewall can actually apply SSL deep inspection and regain full visibility into the traffic. So this is important when we're doing our design decisions and implementing DPI on our network. So talking about how to solve this problem, right? So for SSL deep inspection, this is what we're going to be using. So how does this work? So the firewall essentially acts as a trusted intermediary between the client and the server. So in other words, this is really just a controlled, trusted man in the middle attack, but it's for security purposes. So here's kind of how it works. So when a user initiates an encrypted connection, instead of just passing that traffic through, the firewall intercepts it, decrypts it, and now that that traffic is decrypted, the firewall can perform full deep packet inspection. So once the inspection is complete, the firewall then re-encrypts the traffic and then sends it to the destination. So we're restoring visibility into this encrypted traffic. So to actually accomplish this, the firewall needs to be trusted by the client. So this is where certificates come in. So the firewall uses a CA certificate to generate the cert for the site that the user is visiting. So as long as your client trusts that CA cert, the process is nice and easy. So we have a few different options here that we'll go over, right? The FortiGate by default comes with its own CA certificate that we can install on clients. This really isn't recommended for actual production environments, but we'll just show how it works in like a lab scenario. And then we can use our own CA. So if we have like Windows PKI or OpenSSL or something like a FortiAuthenticator, we can use all of these, right? So in this instance, we'll use PKI, so we can generate our own certificate, upload that to the FortiGate, install it on our clients, and then use that. So let's talk about just some of the challenges and the associated solutions with doing deep packet inspection. So from working with a bunch of different FortiGate users, most networks actually aren't using DPI because they think it's a challenge, and there are certainly challenges associated with it. So let's kind of talk about some of those. So really the important thing to know when implementing this on your network is that the inspection really isn't about inspecting everything. It's about inspecting the right traffic. So the first objection is deployment complexity. So things like generating and deploying certificates, endpoint trust, rollout strategy. There's user and privacy concerns. So most organizations don't want to inspect sensitive things like banking or healthcare traffic, things like that. There's also the technical limitations. So we run into things like certificate pinning, where an application will break if you try to intercept the traffic. But the FortiGate does offer a lot of flexibility here. So using the SSL inspection profiles, we can get pretty granular in the control of what we want to inspect and what we want to exempt from DPI. So for example, we can exempt entire categories like finance or health. We can also exempt applications or certain domains using address objects. So that's another option. For applications that are using certificate pinning, you can bypass them within the profile, or we could even create separate firewall policies above the firewall policy that's doing DPI to allow that traffic with just normal read-only certificate inspection. Right, it's not like it's an all or nothing approach where you either have to deploy full inspection everywhere or not at all. We can really kind of pick and choose what traffic we want to do deep inspection on to kind of strike the balance between security and usability and user privacy. So that's it for really just the concepts behind this. So now we'll hop over to the FortiGate and kind of look how to configure this in a real environment. So just for this demo, I'm using a FortiGate 91G. I'm running version 7.6.6. I also have a Windows domain environment, and I have a Microsoft PKI setup, and I have a test Windows client that we'll use to actually generate the traffic and test the configuration. So what we're going to do here is just walk through deploying SSL deep inspection step by step. We'll first use the FortiGate built-in certificate just to quickly enable it and show you the different features and what that allows us to do on the firewall. And then what we'll do is we'll hop into the Microsoft PKI environment. We can generate a certificate. And this is really more what's in line with how it would be done in a real production scenario, right? So from there, we'll apply the SSL inspection to firewall policies and kind of demonstrate the different features that we can use. And we'll also look at the amount of visibility we gain into the encrypted traffic and how features like web filtering, application control, antivirus, and stuff become much more effective. So we'll also do some real-world exemption handling. So certain sites or applications that don't work well with inspection, we'll show kind of how to bypass that. So with that being said, we'll hop over to the FortiGate and get started. All right, so now we're on the firewall here. So let's show how kind of all this works and how to configure it. So if we go to our security profiles, actually, let's go to the FortiGate. So if we go to our security profiles and we go to SSL inspection, we can see I already created this one here, but by default, you do get a few. So we have a read-only inspection profile, which is going to just be looking at the certificate during the handshake. So we'll get visibility into like the destination and the cert details, but no visibility to the actual encrypted payload. Then we have the default deep inspection. So this is your full SSL decryption, man in the middle using the default FortiGate CA cert. And then you have this default no inspection, which is no inspection, right? So traffic is going to pass through with no visibility. So what I did was I created this profile here, just called it lab deep packet inspection. We can see we are doing full SSL inspection here under the inspection method. And for the CA certificate, we see we have this little warning here, and it says that this is doing full SSL inspection and that the end user will likely see a certificate warning unless the certificate is installed on their browser. So we'll go over that in a sec, how to do that. So you can see we have this default certificate FortiGate CA SSL. And we can see that right here in the certificate store of the FortiGate, this comes by default. So even if we factory reset this same cert is going to be on this firewall. So if we go back and open this up again, we can see we're going to block malicious certificates. And for the port mapping, we're going to inspect all ports. And here we have our quick settings. So in this version, we can actually do this in the GUI, which is very nice. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to block quick. You can choose to inspect this or bypass it altogether if you wish. Down below, we also have our exemptions, so we can exempt reputable websites from FortiGuard if we want. I'm just going to keep that disabled for now. We can add specific categories, so if we want to exempt entire categories, whether those are the built-in ones or any custom categories we create, we can do that as well. We can see by default it's going to exempt finance and banking and health and wellness, which is probably what you'll want to do anyway. You might need to exempt more depending on your organization's requirements, or if you run into any issues with certain applications and websites with certificate pinning. If you need to add specific address objects here, you can do that as well. These are the ones that are by default. So any of these FQDNs will not have deep inspection applied to them. So just keep that in mind as well. You might find that certain applications or sites that you use for your organization don't work with deep packet inspection. So when you're rolling this out and testing, make sure you keep track of what's working and what's not, so you can make these exemptions as needed to allow certain traffic. And we're just going to save this. And now we can actually test this. So we actually have to make a firewall policy. So if we go back up to our firewall policies, I have this policy here, lab DPI demo. So I open this guy up. We're just going to use it on this one client IP. So 10.4.20.3 is my test Windows client. We're going to do all traffic. This is a proxy base because we're going to want to, when we're done with this, we start looking at more features. We want to use some of the proxy-based features along with deep packet inspection. And we can see I have the lab DPI SSL inspection profile assigned. Again, it's just giving me that warning again, just confirming that you are enabling SSL decryption here and you need to install that certificate on the machine. I also have just an application profile. I got a web profile and an antivirus profile. I need to assign, when you're using DPI, I need to assign an actual profile for it to actually take effect. And we're going to log all sessions and we'll enable the policy. And it just gives us another warning again that we are using SSL inspection here. All right, so now if I hop back over to the FortiGate, or not the FortiGate, the client, I also have the FortiGate open on the client. So if I just open a new tab here, and we just type in ESPN.com, for example, we see that I get a certificate error. So if I hit the certificate here, if I can click the right thing. There we go. So we see the ESPN.com common name. So this is the site. And then we see that the certificate is issued by the FortiGate. So that goes back to the inspection profile we just applied along with the firewall policy. We can see that the firewall is actually signing this cert now. And we can see that I am getting this cert warning because this client does not trust this certificate here. Right? So what I can do is I can download this cert. So we're going to open this. So we see this certificate here. This is our FortiGate. And we'll do install. And we'll do local machine. We'll say yes. We're going to do place all certificates in the following store, and we'll browse, and we'll go to the trusted root certificate authority. And we can see that cert is actually installed on the machine now. So what we'll do is we'll come back to this FortiGate, and we can see here I just want to restart the session. So we'll set a filter here for that device, and then we'll just clear all the sessions. So now if we go back to the client, we can see now when I go to espn.com, I don't get that cert warning anymore. And if I actually view the cert, it's still issued by my FortiGate, but now my client is actually trusting that certificate. So this is showing that DPI is actually working now with this lab setup. So what we'll do now is kind of look into the additional features we can configure and some use cases with some different security profiles to show kind of what enabling DPI can do for your environment. Okay, so now that we have deep packet inspection configured and working on this test client, what we can do is actually kind of just give some examples of what this enables us to actually do. What security features can we actually really take advantage of now that we have DPI? So one of them is going to be antivirus. So since most of the traffic on the network is encrypted now, it's going to be very hard for the FortiGate to actually scan these packets and find malware. So now that we have DPI working, we can really take advantage of this. So if we just open up my antivirus profile I have on that policy, it's pretty standard. It's in proxy mode. I'm blocking viruses, inspecting these protocols. I am treating Windows executables and emails as viruses. And then I'm using the kind of extended databases, and I'm using an external malware list as well, just for extra hashes. So there's a couple ways we can actually test that this is working. So what we'll do is we'll hop over to this client, and there's this website, iCar, where we can download test malware files. And this will help us verify that our antivirus is actually working. So if I try to download this file here, we can see that my antivirus profile is blocking this as this signature matches. So we can also try that for any of the other ones here, right? So if I try this one, same thing. So we know now that our antivirus profile is working with deep packet inspection. FortiGuard Labs also has a couple different virus files that we can try to download. So we have here like this machine learning sample. So if I click this here, same thing, we get this alert that trying to download this file, it's infected with the virus, and it matches. And then we also have this VO sample, and we get this same thing. And what we'll do now that we generated a bunch of those logs, is we can go to our antivirus log, and we can see that we have these different files. So we can see here, iCar test file, it's blocked as a malicious file. It tells us the details. All right, so we get a critical threat level. It tells us what type of virus it is, the ID. It gives us a little reference page if we want to read more about it. And it tells us why it was blocked. And you see that's under the malicious category. Same thing for the other test file, for the AI sample. And I can even click these links, and it will bring me to a kind of a description of that file, which is nice. And then we have this one where we actually get the infection type of FortiGuard outbreak protection, so we can kind of see what category they fall under. So that is it for doing antivirus with deep packet inspection, and we'll move on to the next section now. All right, next let's talk about some web filter things we can do. So in this firewall policy, we have this web proxy web filter. And what we're going to do is we're going to enable a couple things here. So we're going to enable enforce safe search on Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex. And we're also going to turn on this log all search keywords. And essentially what this is going to allow us to do is we're going to be able to actually see what our users are searching on their web browser. And we'll also be able to enforce safe search on those 4 web browsers. So one thing to keep in mind here is if you want to always enforce safe image search on a certain policy, what you'll probably want to do is on that same policy where we're applying this is to create an application control profile that blocks other web browsers, right? So things like maybe Edge, Brave, Opera, right? Any other search engine that people might use to kind of bypass this. If you want to always enforce this, you might create your policies in a way where you're only allowing these search engines. But anyway, let's kind of look at how this works. So we'll apply this, and if we hop back over to the client and we open a web browser, if we just search up, for example, Fortinet 123. So we just search that in the web browser on the client. And now what we can do is come back to our web filter log. And what we'll do is we will filter on keyword. And we can see Fortinet 123 comes up. So we can see here in this log that search phrase detected, and we can see all the keywords that are being searched with this policy with deep inspection enabled. What I also did was there's a good dashboard here, FortiView search phrases, where this just gives you a one-page kind of view into all the search phrases that are going down on your network, right? So we can come here and kind of see what users are searching up and then take whatever actions needed based on these search results. So kind of sticking with this search result feature, what we can do is go back into that web filter and edit this. And we can add what's called a content filter. And what we can do is create a string here. So let's say I did test 123. And I enable this, and let's enable that. So we're basically saying we have this pattern here and we want to block that from being searched, right? So if we apply that, and if we just clear the session table just so we're starting fresh, and we come here, and I search test 123, we see that the profile detects that, and it says that that page has been blocked because it contains a banned word. So essentially what you can do here is keep a list of phrases or words that you want to just block from even being searched in general. And you can control that. And we can even check here in the logs. If we go to our web filter, we can see here right? We see this block here, and we see it's because that it contains a banned word, test 123. So that is that, and now we'll move on to the next section. All right, so while we're on the topic of web filters there, I forgot to quickly show how the safe search enforcement works. So, right, we had this setting enabled to enforce safe search on these specified web browsers, right? So if I hop back over to my web browser, so Google falls under this. So if I go to Google Images and we just look up, example, something like this, we'll see that we don't get any explicit results. And we'll see that we get this warning here that safe search is locked to filter by safety settings applied to this browser. So you see we don't have the permissions to change this, that this is locked, right? As long as we're using this browser, that safe search is always going to be enforced, and that's via that web filter. So that's how to enforce safe search with the web filter. Okay, so now we can talk a little bit about application control and what we can do here. So on that policy, that firewall policy, I'm just using this default application profile. You can see I'm just basically monitoring everything and just blocking peer-to-peer applications. So if we just look at the application signatures, we can see we have all our application signatures here. And what we might find if we just kind of scroll through these, I can just search one up, for example, if we just look up YouTube. we can see if I hover over some of them, they say that they require deep packet inspection, right? So YouTube itself does not require deep packet inspection, but any of the sort of more granular features of the application, so for example, accessing a channel or posting a comment or using YouTube Shorts within YouTube or uploading a video, all of this requires deep packet inspection. So with application control and deep packet inspection, this allows us to get very granular in our applications where we can, for applications that support it, we can enable certain features on an application while blocking other features. And you can get a better look at this if I come over here. And if I go to add like an application override, for example, right, I can just see just scrolling through these, anyone with this lock symbol, I need deep SSL inspection to actually take action on that specific application. So what this allows us to do is, right, get granular in our control, but also get granular in our visibility. So we can actually get deeper visibility into what the users are actually doing within these applications. So what I'll do is do a quick example here. So, right, we have our policy here where we have that application profile. So we can use YouTube as an example, right? So if I come over here and go to YouTube, and for example, if I just click on, I'll go to one of my videos. I don't want to get a copyright strike. So if we just go to one of my videos and click on one of these, right? So we'll let that play. And if we come now to our logs, our application control logs, we can see the YouTube logs, and you see we have YouTube, but then we also have, for example, video play. So we can see that the user is not only going to the YouTube site, but they're actually playing a video. And if I filter this by the different sort of YouTube features, right? So we can get some more detail here. So we can see that they're playing a video, and I can actually see what video they're playing with the title, which is great too. So I can see what users are actually watching. I can see the channels that are being accessed, right? So this allows me to really get deeper visibility into the user traffic, which is great. And I can actually take action on these. So for example, what if with YouTube, if I go to my security profiles, application control, and I go here, and let's say, what if I make an override? For example, what if I do one for video play and video access, for example, and I set that to block, right? So I'm going to set that to block. And I'm going to clear these sessions again, just so we get a fresh start. And after I refresh this, we can see that I get a connection error to YouTube. So essentially I cannot watch any videos, right? So even if I wanted to search, and let's say I wanted to click on this video, it's not going to work. Right, so I get the video here, it's just going to load, and it's not going to end up playing. And if I come back to our logs, I get the block, right? So you can see YouTube itself is being allowed, but now I'm disabling the video play functionality where I can't play that video. That specific application is blocked. So that's just a quick example into application control and application monitoring with deep packet inspection enabled. Okay, so we talked about configuring DPI with the built-in certificate on the FortiGate. Now we can just show how we can use our own certificate. So as long as we have our own certificate authority, we can do this. So there's several different options out there. In this use case, I'm just going to be using my Windows PKI. So I have a root CA and I have a sub CA that I'm logged into right now. So I'm in the certificate store on the sub CA. I already issued this cert. You can see it's issued by my root, and then I have this cert here. So, right, I can see it says it has the private key there. So I'm going to export this, and I'm going to say yes, export the private key, and we want it in a PFX format. So we can keep these settings the same. And then we'll just set a password here. And then we'll give it a file name. So we can do, for example, like this. And we can see there's the export. So now what we'll do is we can just open the FortiGate from here. I should have access to it from here. All right. So we go to the firewall. So sign in here. So now we're in the firewall. So we'll go to system, we'll go to certificates. And what we're going to do is import a certificate. So we'll do import here, and we'll select the PKCS12. We'll upload the certificate we exported. Enter the password we created when we exported the file. And we can hit create there. And we're just going to hit OK. And we can see there is our certificate. So what we can do now is go to our client machine. All right, so if we go to our client machine, we want to install that certificate. So we can just come here. We can download this cert. So we'll open this, we'll install it on our local machine. We'll put it in our trusted root CA. And we can see that that is successful. So now what we'll do is hop back to our firewall, and we'll go to our inspection profile. And we'll change the cert now to our new cert, the one that we created. And we can hit OK. And we'll reset our filter, or we'll clear our sessions. So 10.4.20.3. So we'll clear that. And now if we go to a website, we can see now that we have our sub CA certificate as our issuer. So now that's working with our certificate that we created. So this is what you would want to do in a production environment. Right, we don't really want to use that built-in FortiGate one. It's good just for like testing and validating deep packet inspection before you roll it out globally. But obviously, when you're actually running this on your clients in production or your servers or whatever other devices are going to be doing DPI, you're going to want to set it up like this. So of course, there's many different ways of doing it. We just showed one. If you have a FortiAuthenticator, for example, you can do that. There's a few different ways, but this is a pretty easy one, especially if you already have PKI set up. In terms of actually rolling this out to your devices, you can use group policy. You can use something like Intune. You can also, you might already have certs pushed to clients. Like if you're doing certificate authentication for wireless or wired, you might already have that certificate installed on clients anyway. So it might already be there. But that's just one example. So basically what we did there is we just exported our sub CA certificate from our Windows PKI. We uploaded it to the FortiGate. We trusted it on our client and then assigned it to the SSL inspection profile. And now we can see on the client that this is the issuing CA, and that's working. So that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.